Welcome to Living in Color. I'm your host, Farah Nasser, and today we're talking about what it's like to be a person of color while incarcerated and then trying to reintegrate back into society. With me today, I'm joined by Sean Frost, Wanisha Mark, and Drew Ramsey, who are all here to talk about their personal experiences with the justice system. We're also joined by Leslie Ann Fullerton, a residential counselor with Elizabeth Fry Toronto, an organization which supports women in the justice system. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to start with the three of you and ask you to tell us what led you into the justice system, and also any cultural or racial stereotypes that influence that. And I'll start with you, Sean.
I was born and raised in London, Ontario by a single mother who migrated here from South Africa. We grew up in government housing, and throughout my childhood, I was with a single mom, so I didn't have a father. So that led me to look for a father in the streets. And my role model was a drug dealer. And basically, I looked up to him, and from there I started selling drugs. And I started a gang. And then I ended up carrying a firearm to protect myself against other drug dealers. And that led me to shooting somebody and getting sentenced to 10 years in prison.
So there were a lot of factors, obviously, that led to that moment. You were, in fact, a leader of a gang.
Yes, yes.
Okay, Wanisha, I'm going to turn it over to you. Again, the factors that led to it, and you've told me before it started in childhood. Yeah. And you actually just got released recently, too.
Yeah, I was just released a couple months ago. Well, what led me to my crime was basically, I grew up in a single parent home. My mom was always trying to make ends meet and always struggling, so I saw that growing up. So I didn't want to, give her any burdens or try to ask her for money or, so I was always trying to hustle, trying to make my own dollar, trying to make sure we're all eating because I have two younger brothers at home, right? So I wanted to make sure that everything was running smoothly. I didn't want to give my mom any stress. And then, I decided to import, right? And that's what led me to being incarcerated. I was just released a few months ago.
Thanks I appreciate you all being so candid with this. I know I can't imagine it being easy to just talk about like this on camera, so thank you. And Drew, you're still at the tail end of your parole.
That's correct.
So how did it start for you, and what led to that?
I was about 12 years old. My mom also was a single mother growing up. She was a drug addict, so she was addicted to crack. My dad was a drug dealer, and so that was a lifestyle that was in my home. I grew up to that lifestyle, which, similar to Frost, which forced me to go out and look for other role models that weren't pretty much the right role models for me at that time. And that led me up to life of crime, joining a gang, and then end up serving a penitentiary bit at the end of it.
Leslie Ann, I see you're taking notes here. I mean, when you're hearing these stories, how does culture and racial stereotypes play into people getting into the justice system?
Yeah, so these situations are people trying to find access to economic well-being, trying to find access. And the thing is, they're not searching for it. The environment is rich with these opportunities where this is their reality. It's not like they're going out and searching for a drug dealer. It's handed to them. The environment is, it's almost like it's created by design to have these drugs and these, all these deviances just readily available. Because it's not just black, it's like Muslim, it's Indian, East Indian, it's Aboriginal, and a lot of them are populated in inner city communities. So the narrative that these people don't want to uplift themselves kind of creates a self-fulfilling prophecy where they try to gain access to economic well-being by participating in drugs, by doing what is accessible to them to create that economic well-being.
I want to jump off of that because I found something you said to me, Wanisha, really interesting. I said, was it hard for you to make that choice about drugs? And you said, no, it was in my family. It was something that something that just came naturally. Did any of you feel, have big dreams growing up, or did you think, okay, this is the only way that I'm going to survive, I'm just going to do this?
Well, I had big dreams growing up, but You know, where I'm from, it was like we only thought that you could either get out through the music game or through the drug game, and that was our focus. Like that's all we knew, right? And we believed that the music was going to get us out because, like my friend here said, there's limited social programming. There was no, social programming, pro-social support for youth like us in the neighborhoods, and that's what causes us to turn to the streets.
If I may add to what he just said, their intentions are well. Our parents, my mom raised me well, taught me values, taught me things, but when it comes to the streets, starting off at a young age, like in school, I was labeled the bad kid, and back then, the programs that they had for people who had behavior issues, it was called behavior resource.
Behavior school.
Right, so.
Really? So you're already thinking as a little kid,
Yeah.
I'm bad.
And what happens is that label follows you. So throughout the school, when you have to go to behavior resource, you're labeled as the bad kid already. So it's easier for you to, get in trouble. So what I found is that as I moved out of public school and into high school, I already had that mentality that I was the bad kid. So it was so easy for me to follow those stereotypes and look up to the OGs in my hood and, want to be a gangster.
What age did it all start for you?
I think I caught my first case when I was 13.
13. And Drew, how old were you?
I was 12.
12 and 13. I can't even imagine. So so we've talked a bit about what led you guys to here. Now I want to talk about what it was like to be incarcerated as a person of color. What is that experience like? And I'll start with you, Drew, on this one.
My experience wasn't great at all, but I never had primarily any racial things happen to me, but I've seen things happen. Being incarcerated in a small town, they had two different ranges. So they had a range for the whites and the natives, and then they had the range just for the blacks.
So a range is, I guess, an area
Yeah.
where everybody's kind of grouped together.
Right.
So one for blacks and Aboriginal people, right?
No, it would be the Aboriginal and the whites.
And the whites.
Yeah.
And where were you?
And the black. I was actually with the Aboriginal and the whites.
You were with the Aboriginal.
Yeah, I was on that range.
And what was it
my
called,
whole
that range?
It's called 6 White.
6 White.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's actually called that.
Yeah.
And the black one, what was that one called?
It was just like the jungle range. They called it the jungle range.
The jungle.
Yeah.
See, just even those names.
Just those names are they're stereotypical, they're racial terms.
Right. And so what was it like being a black guy in the white range?
It was hard, I never really had that much issues with the guys. Like they kind of liked me. I was quiet, but you get the odd racist joke, and then and if they would say a racist joke and the guard would hear, the guard would laugh like ha ha and chuckle, So that the guards are racist too if they're interacting in those conversations that are inappropriate. It kind of makes you feel uncomfortable in a way, and you feel unsafe.
What was it like in a women's facility, Wanisha?
Yeah, it's a bit different. The jails are more, there's more black girls in the provincial system, and there's less in the federal system.
Federal system is for bigger crimes, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
But when I got to prison, it was more whites and natives, unbelievably. And then when you go to minimum security, we were actually on our own floor. We had our own floor. Right. And it was just all the Caribbeans, and they call it when the guards are doing their rounds, they do the bottom floor, and then we'd hear them talking, and they'd be like, oh, welcome to welcome to Jamaica. Mm-hmm. Or one time I was in my room, and they were doing rounds, and obviously there was a new guard who was being trained, and the guard came around and he was like, welcome, this is Jamaica, this is Jamaica, welcome to Jamaica, welcome to the ghetto. And I was just like, wow. And they were just laughing, it was just, normal, right? And I really, that day I realized that we were actually all in one spot. And when I looked downstairs, there were all whites and natives.
Right, so they're just putting
everybody else were, yeah.
So I'm going to bring you into this. What are you hearing about this that's problematic about segregation and anything else?
I'm hearing a few things. My attention to the fact that provincial provincial jails are more populated with black is very revealing, because now we're going into the color of poverty. So what I'm seeing and what I'm reading is the smaller crimes, that gets less than 2 years. Those are crimes that are normally geared towards maybe trying to make some money on the streets.
Robbery, bringing in drugs,
trapping,
right?
All of that stuff. So it's surrounding poverty. And then we start seeing that it's racialized. So then it becomes the color of poverty that is manifested inside the incarceration system.
It's true.
So that's very revealing for me.
I want to bring up a statistic because I think you really nailed it when it comes to representation. So Aboriginal adults constitute 4.1% of Canada's population, yet in provincial and federal correctional facilities, they represent over a quarter of inmates.
Yeah.
Why are we seeing this in the Aboriginal population? And what are you hearing about that when you deal with women, I know who you work with, who are Aboriginal, who are in the justice system?
So the reason why we're seeing this with the Indigenous population is systemic racism. It's also generational trauma. So when we're looking at these numbers, what we're doing is we're looking at the snapshot of a community's journey within society. We're not looking at the fact that they were displaced on their own land. We're not looking at the fact that they were their culture was destroyed. Well, not destroyed, but it was not left unscathed from colonization and the implications of colonization. And it's not just colonization because it's happening right now. They're still experiencing that. So there's a long history that is a part of this statistic that the numbers don't show.
If I may add to what you said about the intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
Growing up around a lot of Aboriginal people, you can see the effect it has if you look back to the residential schools, where their culture was stripped from them. Now, a lot of times, we turn to substances and things like that, to deal with our problems like that, when ultimately it's just a cycle of, trauma that my friends have went through too from their family. A lot of my friends' parents who are Aboriginal, have issues that stem from the residential schools. So it's passed down through generations, right?
And it becomes a cycle.
And it becomes a cycle, right?
What has life been like for you since you've gotten out? What has it been like to get a job, to reintegrate into society? I mean, first of all, being a person of color, it can be harder to get a job sometimes. And then you add to that the record.
Coming out, right? Because, first of all, it's my first ever bid, right? So I wasn't prepared. I didn't know anything about jail, prison, or whatever, going in or coming out, right? So when I was coming out, I didn't know about any of the resources. I didn't know anything. I was just going off of, day by day. And when I came out, I was really worried about obviously getting a job because, right, I have a criminal record. I don't know where to apply. I don't know who's gonna accept me. My resume wasn't even up to date because the gap that I had, right? And I was just really nervous about everything. But IFRA was partners with somebody else, whatever. They got me into a little program, right, around my area. And I got a job there, and there was a lot of opportunity there.
Well, for me, it wasn't really an issue because when I was in prison, I had a plan. I wasn't going to allow society to set me back, So when I came out, I opened up my own company, and so I own my own business now, so I didn't have to really work for anybody. But my goal is to, in the future, to help those same people that are coming out of prison and give them employment, because it definitely it's really hard to come out, especially with a criminal record.
Sean?
My plan was to go to university, but what I found is when I got out and approached CSC or my parole officer and said, hey, I'm going to go to university. I'm going to, use my experiences to help other people like him, you know. I started my own company too called Global Inspiration, where we would go around to youth organizations and deliver mentorship programs. But what I found is that right before I got out, boom, I got hit with a parole order saying that I couldn't associate with my family. So that was the first barrier. So I wasn't allowed to go home to London. I had to live in Toronto. I had to pick another city. So I said, I'm going to go to Toronto. I'm going to go to university. And I lost a lot of my family while I was in there through that long stretch. But even the family that I had when I got out, they deemed them a bad influence because my dad has a criminal record, my mom has a criminal record, so I couldn't hang around them, let's just say. So I was dropped off in Toronto by myself, basically, and said, here you go. The barriers that I faced was, one, not being allowed to be around my family, being alienated. Two, my parole officers saying, no, go to a temp agency, get a job, get a shovel. And that's the status quo of ex-cons when they get out, right? Most of them, males, like where I was, would do construction work and things like that. But like my brother over here said, is when you have a big plan, it's not available. The information alone, even to get into university, I had to find all myself. I had no help from nobody. But then here's the biggest thing I found is that, I'm not just speaking for myself, I'm speaking for male, female, all convicts, is that there's not a lot of support for mental health, addiction, PTSD, things that most people who do long stretches, you know, face. So once parole's done, basically all those John Howard societies, Elizabeth Fry's, all this structured plan that you have, it ends. Mm-hmm. So there needs to be a lot more continuity in the support that we get.
I really appreciate this. This has been so enlightening, and you have been so candid, and you've put it all out there for us, and I hope it really opens some minds. So thank you.
Thank you
for being part of this conversation, and thank you for watching Living in Color. Thank you for watching Living in Color. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you have an idea for a future Living in Color episode, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave them in the comment section.